going to be so honest with you guys. Some of the discourse has gotten to the point of like obsession. It's gotten into this weird obsession. Even the game against the Washington Mystics a couple nights ago, Caitlin Clark hits this huge game winner. And instead of celebrating the game winner and kind of taking that as this big moment and obviously a confidence boost for Caitlin.
Nobody talks about what happened the week after Caitlin Clark hit that game winner. Not really. They talk about the shot, the step back, the arc, the net, but nobody talks about what came after, and what came after is honestly more disturbing than anything that happened on the court. Fans went frame by frame, literally. They pulled the broadcast footage and started analyzing where her eyes moved after the buzzer. They studied body language. They built entire theories about what a half-second glance at a sideline meant about the internal collapse of a franchise. And the wild part, this wasn't fringe internet behavior. This was mainstream fever discourse. So before we talk about basketball, and we're going to talk about basketball because something genuinely strange is happening with this team, you need to understand what kind of pressure cooker we're actually dealing with here. Because the Indiana Fever situation in 2026 isn't just a sports story. It's something much weirder, much more human, and honestly much darker than people are willing to admit. Let's go back. Way back. Because to understand why this fan base is practically unraveling, you have to understand what they fell in love with in 2024, and you have to understand exactly what was taken from them. The 2024 Fever were chaos. Beautiful, ridiculous, wonderful chaos. They ran fast breaks before defenses could set. They launched threes that had no business going in. They gave up points, they scored points. And every single game felt like a street fight that somehow ended in a jazz concert. They were not a championship team. Everyone knew it. But nobody cared because watching them was genuinely thrilling. And then Caitlin Clark happened to that team, or rather happened for that team, and suddenly the WNBA was being watched by people who had never watched a women's basketball game in their lives. Millions of them. People tuned in not just because of Clark, but because of what Clark plus chaos looked like on a basketball court. It was electric. And here's where the story gets complicated. The Fever looked at that moment, that cultural lightning strike, and instead of riding the wave, they rebuilt. They didn't just tweak the roster. They reconstructed it. And what they built on paper is genuinely terrifying. Kelsey Mitchell, who can get a bucket against anyone on the planet. Aliyah Boston, who is so technically sound it almost looks boring until you realize she just scored 22 points without a single flashy move. Lexi Hull, Sophie Cunningham, Maisha Hines-Allen, and then there's Clark herself returning from injury, carrying the weight of an entire cultural movement on her shoulders while trying to simply find her rhythm again. On paper, this team should be unstoppable. So why, 11 games into the 2026 season, are they sitting 7th in the standings? Why does every game feel like watching a sports car stuck in second gear? And why are the fans who should be celebrating the most talented Fever roster in history instead building conspiracy theories about eye contact? Here's the number that should haunt every single person in the Indiana organization. 9th. Offensive rating. 9th in the league. Let that sit with you for a second. You have 3 players capable of averaging close to 20 points per game. You have arguably the most watched point guard in women's basketball history. You have shooters, you have a versatile forward, you have every ingredient for a top 2 offense in this league. And you're 9th. That's not a slump. That's a structural problem. And the proof that it's structural, look 500 miles northwest. Look at Minnesota. The Lynx are 10-2 right now, and they're doing it without Nafisa Collier, who many considered their best player. They're doing it with a rookie point guard. Her name is Olivia Miles, and she is currently making the Fever situation look even more uncomfortable than it already is, because here's the part that stings. Natasha Howard, the same Natasha Howard who played in Indiana's system last year and struggled, went to Minnesota and is playing the best basketball of her recent career. Same player, different system, completely different results. Coach Cheryl Reeves said something in a post-game interview that should have been played on loop in the Indiana film room. She said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that she lets Olivia do her thing. She gave a rookie the keys. She built around what her point guard does naturally, not what she wanted her point guard to become. And what happened? Miles is top 6 in the league in assists. She's running high pick and roll with Howard like they've played together for years. She's running away with Rookie of the Year, and there isn't even a conversation about second place. Meanwhile, the Fever, with a generational talent at the same position, are ninth in offensive efficiency, and the discourse has devolved into body language forensics. Do you see the problem? Because the problem isn't Caitlin Clark. The problem isn't Kelsey Mitchell. The problem isn't even the roster, which again, on paper, is elite. The problem is that someone is forcing a system onto players instead of building a system around them, and the gap between what this team should look like and what it actually looks like is so wide that fans have started filling that gap with their own explanations. And when fans start filling gaps, they don't fill them with boring explanations. They fill them with drama, with betrayal, with secret rebellions and hidden agendas. The LA trade rumors, and yes, there are actual circulating rumors about Caitlin Clark being traded to the Los Angeles Sparks, are not based on any real reporting. There's no source. There's no smoke. But the fact that these rumors not only exist but spread, that fans share them, debate them, treat them as plausible, that tells you everything about the emotional temperature of this situation right now. Think about what it means that fans are entertaining trade scenarios for a player who has explicitly and repeatedly said she loves being in Indiana. She loves the coaching staff. She wants to be there. At some point, you have to take someone at their word. But here's what's being missed in the noise, and this is the part that nobody wants to say out loud. Caitlin Clark's individual performance hasn't consistently matched the standard she set for herself. Not yet. And that's okay. It's okay, because she's coming back from injury. It's okay, because rhythm takes time. It's okay, because even generational players have early season stretches where nothing quite clicks. But it's also something fans need to sit with honestly, because not every subpar game is a systemic failure. Sometimes a 16-point shooting night where she goes 5 of 15 from the field is just a 5 of 15 night. Sometimes the accountability lands on the player, even when that player is the best in the league. That's not criticism. That's just sports. What's not okay, what's actually distorting the entire conversation, is the layer of parasocial intensity that has wrapped itself around this team like a fog that nobody can see through anymore. People aren't watching Indiana Fever games right now. They're watching a psychological drama where basketball occasionally interrupts. And that's exhausting for everyone, for the players, for the coaches, for the journalists trying to cover it fairly, and honestly for casual fans who just want to watch a good game and feel something. Here's the irony at the center of all of this. The very passion that made the Indiana Fever the most talked about team in women's basketball, the passion that drove ratings, that brought new fans to the WNBA, that made Caitlin Clark a cultural phenomenon rather than just an athlete, that same passion, unchecked and unmoored from the actual basketball, is becoming the thing that poisons the well. The mainstream media outlets that were running 3 Fever stories a week in 2024, most of them have moved on. What's left in the discourse is increasingly extreme, increasingly polarized, and increasingly disconnected from what's happening between the lines on the court. And while everyone's busy arguing about what a raised eyebrow in the third quarter means, something genuinely important is being ignored. The coaching staff is running out of time to fix this. 11 games into an 80-game season sounds like early days. And in one sense, it is. There is absolutely time to turn this around. But here's the thing about momentum in professional sports, and this applies to coaching adjustments as much as anything else. The patterns you establish in the first 15 to 20 games of a season become incredibly hard to break. Players internalize systems. Habits calcify. And if the Fever spend the first quarter of their season teaching their roster to play a style that doesn't maximize their talent, unwinding that is a months-long project. The comparison that should keep Stephanie wide up at night isn't Minnesota. It's what this Fever offense should look like by design. Clark to Boston in high screen and roll. That combination alone should be destroying defenses every single night. Boston is a phenomenal screener who can pop to the mid-range or roll to the basket with equal effectiveness. Clark is one of the best decision-makers in basketball at any level when she's playing in space and rhythm. Add Mitchell as the release valve, add the corner shooting from Hull and Cunningham, and theoretically you have an offense that opposing coaches genuinely cannot scheme against. But we're not seeing it. Not consistently. Not even close to consistently. And that gap between what should be and what is where all the drama lives. Now here's where it gets really interesting, and this is the part of the story most people aren't telling. Caitlin Clark has more power in this league than almost any player in WNBA history. Not just because of her talent, because of what she represents commercially, culturally, and institutionally. If she wanted out of Indiana, she would get out. We've seen players in this league force their way to different situations when they needed to. We've seen stars make it very clear through agents, through interviews, through simple public behavior, that a change needed to happen. Clark has done none of that. She hasn't done the subtle version of it. She hasn't done the not-so-subtle version. She has consistently, publicly, and without apparent reservation, expressed her commitment to Indiana. So, why does the trade discourse persist? Why do fans keep spinning these narratives? Because the alternative, accepting that this is a well-intentioned coaching staff that simply hasn't found the right system yet, that the team is in a genuine developmental purgatory through no one's dramatic fault, is too boring. It doesn't feed the hunger for narrative. It doesn't give the parasocial investment anywhere to go. So brains manufacture drama to fill the void. And the result is that we've lost the actual story, which is genuinely compelling on its own. Because there is a real story here. It's the story of a franchise that had a magical, chaotic, unrepeatable first act, and now has to figure out what its second act looks like. It's the story of 3 elite players who haven't yet found the combination that makes them simultaneously devastating. It's the story of a coaching staff that has the defensive pieces working. Fourth in defensive rating is real. That's legitimate good coaching, but hasn't unlocked the offensive formula. That's a fascinating basketball story. That's worth caring about. But it keeps getting buried under theories about whether 2 players made eye contact in the right way after a timeout. Here's what the rest of the season looks like if nothing changes. The Fever will continue to be a frustrating watch. Not a bad team, their defense alone keeps them relevant, but a deeply unsatisfying one for anyone who sees what they could be. The standings will stay middling. The discourse will stay toxic. And slowly, the casual fans that Caitlin Clark brought to this sport, the ones who showed up because it was exciting, because it felt alive, because women's basketball in 2024 felt like the most fun you could have watching sports, those fans will quietly drift away. Not with drama. Not with announcements. They'll just stop tuning in. And that loss, quiet as it is, will matter more than any standings position. But here's the other version of this story. Because it exists. It's equally possible. The coaching staff watches film this week and has a hard conversation about what's working and what isn't. They simplify. They stop trying to install every wrinkle of the system and go back to what the talent does naturally. Clark runs pick and roll with Boston. Mitchell gets downhill. The shooters space the floor. 3 possessions in, something clicks. Then something else clicks. And suddenly you're watching the team that this roster was always supposed to be, not the chaos team of 2024, but something better. Something sustainable and dominant. A team that wins not just because they're exciting, but because they're genuinely hard to beat. That team would be appointment television. That team would rebuild everything that's been lost in the noise. That team would silence every conspiracy theory simply by being great. The talent is there. The personnel is right. The defensive foundation is already built. This doesn't require a miracle. It requires an adjustment. And the season is long enough for that adjustment to matter. But the clock is ticking in a way that isn't just about wins and losses. It's about whether this fan base, this incredible, passionate, sometimes completely unhinged fan base, can hold on long enough for the good version of this story to arrive. Because here's the thing about patience in the era of social media, short-form content, and 24-hour discourse cycles. It's nearly extinct. People don't wait for storylines to develop anymore. They demand resolution now, and when resolution doesn't come, they invent it. The Indiana Fever don't just need to fix their offense. They need to give their fans something real to talk about before the manufactured narratives become the only ones left standing. That game winner against Washington on May 15th was a glimpse. One shot, one moment, one flash of what Caitlin Clark becomes when the game slows down and the confidence is fully back. That wasn't chaos basketball, and it wasn't grinding defensive possession basketball. It was something else, controlled, brilliant, inevitable. Like watching someone remember exactly who they are. That's the team that's hiding inside this roster. The one that plays with that kind of certainty. The question isn't whether it's in there. It clearly is. The question is whether everyone involved has the patience, the humility, and the coaching intelligence to bring it out before the noise drowns everything else.
Fix the system.
Trust the talent. Give us basketball worth celebrating. Because the story of the 2026 Indiana Fever doesn't have to be a cautionary tale about wasted potential and parasocial collapse. It can still be something else entirely. Something worth watching. Something worth waiting for. But that version of the story, it starts on the court. And it starts now.